Our collective public imagination is so impoverished. The only way we can seemingly describe the fight against a global pandemic is to call it a war. I'm personally not too keen on war metaphors, but in this case, it may be appropriate, although inadvertently so. Because if you think about it, it is kind of like a war. Actually, just one particular war, the First World War to be precise. It is kind of like that, isn't it? You know, that infamous war brought on by the greed, folly, and neglect of the wealthy ruling classes and its political minions, the very same people that waxed eloquent about duty and responsibility, strength and resolve, Sayyam and Sankalp from the comfort of their mansions, while tens of millions of poor, marginalized, exploited people were sacrificed to appease the ravenous god of war. Yes, we are at war, and it is bringing to light like never before the grotesque inhumanity of our social, economic, and political system. As the Haigs and Ludendorffs of our time exhort us to endure the tough times for the greater good, it is probably a good idea to see who has to endure what exactly. While us middle class people fret about which app to use to get groceries delivered home, the working people of this country, who are overwhelmingly employed in the unorganized sector, have little to no savings and now no livelihood either, are stuck with the marginally more serious problem of actually finding themselves the money to purchase food and groceries. While we are wondering what show to watch on our streaming services next, migrant laborers are walking hundreds of kilometers back to their villages without food, water, and shelter, and being harassed countless times by the police. And all the while, they're being exposed to the virus, if they haven't already been, and increasing the risk of the disease spreading to rural areas, thus defeating the entire purpose of the lockdown. While some of us complain about being restricted to our homes, there are lakhs of people in this country, a lot of them children, out on the streets with no home, no food, and no way to protect their families from the virus. While we feel imprisoned in our homes, actual prisoners in our country's overcrowded, unhygienic jails are at the mercy of a ruthless state. While we handsomely rewarded intellectual laborers who think of ourselves doing important work have the luxury to work from home, the underpaid essential workers, the nurses, the medical workers, the sanitation workers, the garbage collectors, the truckers, the train operators, the grocery store workers, delivery personnel, and many, many more are out there keeping our society functioning, preventing it from falling apart as they have done for every single day of their lives. Only now the importance of their work is starkly visible. The reason I'm saying all this is not to tell you, hey, look, other people are worse off than you, so stop complaining. Neither am I trying to pull off some sentimental liberal bullshit like, oh, look at those unfortunate poor people. Personal acts of charity are what we need right now. Yeah, you should help, but that's not the point here. The point is that we should be asking ourselves an important fundamental question. Why are they out there and you are in here watching this video? Why is it that the people who are worst equipped to deal with the crisis are the ones who will be affected the most? No, the answer isn't that they are lazy or stupid or unlucky or they lack financial prudence. No. The answer is much more obvious. They are there because they are kept there by design. And I don't just mean that we choose to deny a vast number of humanity the right to food, to free healthcare, to decent housing, despite having the resources, because a bunch of soulless hacks, by which I mean almost all mainstream economists and corporate propagandists, keep telling us how that will be bad for the deficit or cause high inflation or threaten macroeconomic stability. I mean, what good are your five PhDs from Yale if you cannot figure out how to feed and house a population and ensure macroeconomic stability? If you don't do it, that can mean only two things. Either you don't have what it takes to figure it out, in which case nobody should be listening to you anyways, or any commitment you profess towards the eradication of poverty is insincere and purely rhetorical. These people don't really care about improving the lives of the working class. In fact, the policies they prescribe and implement actually make their lives worse. Like, they will proudly bang thalis to show their appreciation for frontline workers in a time of crisis, but their life's work has been dedicated to screwing over those same workers who they're now applauding. The strain of capitalist ideology championed by these people that has dominated India and the world for decades now has, by the removal of impediments to capital flow and trade, failed miserably in aiding serious growth of a large scale organized industrial sector, which they promise, by the way. It's not just that we've not created enough manufacturing jobs, which we haven't, but even the organized manufacturing sector is increasingly relying on short term contract labor, which means no job security, no benefits, and of course, low wages. And whatever paltry number of jobs we have created do not compensate at all for the massive loss of jobs occurring due to the devastation of the agrarian economy, small scale unorganized manufacturing, and the drastic collapse in female participation in the workforce, especially in rural areas. Just in the agricultural sector alone, nearly 63 million workers lost or left their jobs between 2004-5 and 2017-18, according to a recent study by Mehrotra and Parida at the Center for Sustainable Employment, Azim Premji University. Think about it. Nearly 5 million people a year on average over a 13-year period stopped working in the agricultural sector. A lot of them flooded into cities to find work, and as the mass of desperate workers swelled up in urban areas with not enough jobs to go around, real wages virtually stagnated in this period. This is why we are seeing migrant workers dying on the roads while walking home because they have no savings, no safety cushion to help them during this crisis. The complete unviability of agriculture meant that real wages have stagnated in rural India as well, the study notes, leaving them also hopelessly disadvantaged in the face of this crisis. Furthermore, you have a state and media class scared out of their wits about the fiscal deficit, which means that in the event of an economic slowdown, the government's ability to intervene in the economy to boost demand through spending is severely constrained. Large scale transfers to corporations through tax breaks and subsidies and loan write offs are good, though, because, it creates a healthy business environment. And that has worked out so well for everyone, hasn't it? Anyway, you have a working population struggling with stagnant real wages with an absolute fall in the number of employed persons, according to Mehrotra and Parida's paper, which is unprecedented in India's history. And on top of all this, the privatization of essential services like healthcare, education, electricity, etc., another pillar of neoliberal dogma, raises the cost of living. Even worse, as people like Prabhat Patnaik have argued, not only do these services become more expensive, their effect is underestimated in the inflation data, which means that the actual inflation for these people at least is much higher. This point needs to be emphasized. If actual inflation is higher, then real wages, which are calculated using inflation data, are not just stagnant but falling. That is the state the majority of this country's population is in going into this coronavirus crisis. Absolute decline in wages, no savings, laden in debt, underfed, undernourished, and immiserated. I would ask you to imagine what a global pandemic will do to such a population, but you don't have to. We are and we will see it unfold over the coming weeks and months. But hey, that's capitalism for you. That's how it works, how it really works. And because of this crisis, for once, the class divide and its ghastly consequences in our society are visible for everyone but the most indoctrinated to see. And these consequences are not just conjured out of thin air or are manifestations of some iron law of physics. No, they are the intended and predictable outcomes of the actions of people in power following a dogshit, garbage economic ideology. 100 years ago, after the outbreak of the First World War, the most destructive humanity had ever fought at the time, brought on by a pissing match between rival capitalist imperialist powers, Rosa Luxemburg wrote, "Business thrives in the ruins. Cities are turned into shambles, villages into cemeteries, entire countries into deserts, churches into stables. International law, treaties, and alliances, the most sacred words and the highest authority, have been torn into scraps. There are food riots in Venice, in Lisbon, Moscow, Singapore. There is plague in Russia, and misery and desperation is everywhere. Shamed, dishonored, wading in blood, and dripping with filth, thus capitalist society stands. This is it in reality, not as we usually see it, playing the roles of righteousness, of ethics, of order, but as a ravenous beast, as an orgy of chaos, as a pestilential breath, devastating culture and humanity. So it appears in all its hideous nakedness." This is it. Look at it. Look at the people who made this happen and get angry.